TikTok, all that good stuff. Follow us. We got merch out on millions.com. Be sure to go buy some. We got a lot of nice sweatshirts, hats, all that good gear that you could get to sit around and listen to the water cooler, wear your favorite merch, and hear us talk about the latest in sports. The biggest development of the week has got to be Notre Dame losing to NIU in what has got to be one of the biggest upsets in college football history. Going into this game, Notre Dame was number 5. They came off a tough win against A&M last week. That was a pretty close game. I actually thought that A&M might be able to pull up an upset, but Notre Dame was able to come out on top. Unfortunately, this week they were not able to do that. They lost 16-14, and they have plummeted down the rankings. A new AP poll came out today. Notre Dame is now 18th, and based on how they played last week and the fact they just lost to NIU, I think it's safe to say they're not officially out of playoff contention, but the fact they haven't looked good doesn't indicate to me that they're going to go undefeated the rest of the season. So I think it's game over pretty much for the Fighting Irish. That was a tough loss. I mean, they just haven't – their play hasn't matched their rankings all season. I'm not going to lie. I didn't sit down and have time to watch the game yesterday. I saw some of the highlights. It just looks like NIU was just there to play and Notre Dame wasn't. And the funny part is they paid NIU like $1.4 million to have that game. So they just paid a nothing school over $1 million to come in and ruin their season. And, I mean, say what you will about the game itself, like what it means from an X's and O's standpoint. This has to be a huge psychological setback for Notre Dame. The fact that they can get upset by an unranked team when they were projected to be one of the best teams in college football this year, this is going to have them questioning themselves for the foreseeable future, and I think teams will be well equipped to take advantage of that. So I think that's a wrap for Notre Dame. And it was almost a wrap for Alabama too yesterday. Maybe not as close as Notre Dame. If you look at the final score to the Alabama game yesterday, it was 42-16, which looks like it was a blowout. But going into the fourth quarter, that was a 14-13 game against South Florida. Now, last year, Alabama struggled against South Florida too. They got held to 3 points in the first half, and they were able to put together some good offense in the second half. But at the end of the day, they just looked horrible last year. And for whatever reason, South Florida continued to give Alabama trouble this year too. On the day that Alabama dedicated Bryant-Denny Stadium's field to Nick Saban, they decided to honor him with one of the most pitiful performances I've ever seen since I've been following Alabama football closely. It probably made Nick Saban very happy that he decided to retire and that this unsophisticated, undisciplined team is now Kalen DeBoer's problem. So there were two plays, I think, that really just set in stone how big of an issue this Alabama team has with discipline. The first was Wilkin Formby, who was an O-lineman, getting a holding call that negated an over 40-yard rush touchdown by Jalen Milroe. And another was a red zone fumble that cost Alabama a perfect opportunity to get a touchdown and finally start to build some momentum. Now that fumble, it didn't nip them in the butt as bad as it could have. They got a 4-and-out on South Florida, and then they got a touchdown the next go-around. But still, that could have been a really costly game. And if Alabama ended up losing that red zone fumble would have been the replay that kept playing over and over on SportsCenter for the next week. And it's just sad. And this year and last year both, I don't know what is causing the breakdown, but penalties have been Alabama's biggest problem. They're a really talented team if they could just get out of their own way. Yesterday, they had 13 penalties, for a loss of 120 yards. Now, that might be fine against South Florida, but when Georgia comes to Tuscaloosa in 3 weeks, 13 penalties is going to be a one-way ticket to Blowout City. And 3 fumbles were the final total for how many they had. The red zone one was the most egregious, but it certainly wasn't the only one. And Alabama has really got to work on maintaining control of the ball and not having silly penalties cut their momentum every time they get something going. I mean, it was like clockwork yesterday. They would have a really good drive, but some holding call or some other issue, like too many players in the field, like something would always stall their momentum when they were finally building it. And that is something that Nick Saban, for whatever reason, was unable to hammer home for this team last year. And Kalen DeBoer really needs to figure out how to hammer home for this team this year, because Alabama somehow, some way, managed to stay ranked at number 4 this week in the AP poll. But if it were up to me, I think Ole Miss should be number 4 and Alabama number 5, because Ole Miss played great yesterday and Alabama did not. They had a hot fourth quarter that allowed them to slide by, because ultimately they did win by over 25 points, but that win was nowhere near as impressive as the final score would suggest. Now, I said at the start that the biggest development of this weekend was Notre Dame dropping all the way down to 18. If you're a Texas fan, you could convince me that the actual biggest development, I still think it's Notre Dame, but could be Texas beating Michigan 31-12. Now, this Michigan team is not the same Michigan team that won the national championship last year. They had 13 players go to the NFL in the draft. Their coach is now in the NFL. So this is a team on the rebuild. But despite that, they were ranked, I think, 8th going into this season. And Texas was able to put up a really dominant win behind some great quarterback play from Quinn Ewers. And Michigan has now dropped down to 15, so there's still a chance they can work their way back into the top 12. But it shows that Texas can be dominant against top teams, which is really important given the last we saw of Texas playing a top team. It was them losing to Washington in a game that I thought they were going to win. I think most people, despite the fact that Washington was the 2 seed, thought that Texas would come out on top in that game. And Texas beating Michigan as bad as they did is a good indication that losing to Washington made Texas hungrier and that they might have something, a little fire burning in their gut for this upcoming season. They're now number 2, and I'm really excited to see what's going to happen when Texas plays Georgia in a month or two, because that could very well determine what the national championship odds look like for this season. Now, that's pretty much all the major college football developments from this weekend. Most of the teams play bottom feeders. I mean, Georgia, Tennessee, they all played a bunch of no-names. But the NFL season got off to a very controversial start. The Chiefs beat the Ravens 27-20, all because a last-second touchdown the Ravens had that would have sent the game into overtime got overturned because receiver Isaiah Likely had a toe on the line. Now, for any basketball fans who might recall Kevin Durant missing a chance to beat the Bucks and possibly advance in the playoffs in the 2021 playoffs because he had a toe on the three-point line, that turned his would have been game tying three-pointer into a two-pointer, and they ended up losing that game. Very reminiscent of that. Ultimately, his toe was on the line, so it was the right call, but you just hate to see a game get decided because of a tiny technicality like that. And when I mean tiny, like his toe was less than like a millimeter on the out-of-bounds line, and they called it. But a millimeter is still a millimeter, and he was out of bounds. It just sucks for Isaiah Likely that he really could have been the ones to help the Ravens get their season off to a hot start with a good win over the two-time Super Bowl champs looking to three-peat, and instead they have to get sent home like that. Now, speaking of getting sent home, though, like I was just saying about Texas, like maybe this will tick the Ravens off and motivate them. I hope it does. Like stuff like that can either make you or break you when you get that close to a huge victory and you lose it. It can either make you fold like a house of cards, or that taste of victory can make you hooked and make you want to do nothing else but get back to that point. So if the Ravens and Chiefs end up meeting each other in the playoffs, the Ravens are going to remember that game. That's what Lamar Jackson was saying after the game. I hope it's true. I hope they play like a team with something to prove. And the Chiefs better count their lucky stars they didn't go into overtime, because they did not play like a two-time Super Bowl champion team on Thursday night. They played like a team that has a championship hangover, like a team that's a little bit banged up from making a bunch of long playoff runs over the last couple years. And they didn't look like a team who's going to win a Super Bowl this year. So hopefully they can get a little bit of energy, resuscitation, whatever, and that this game is a wake-up call for the Chiefs too. But as it stands, I'm not very hopeful about the Chiefs' Super Bowl hopes. Patrick Mahomes, he played all right, but he didn't have a stellar Patrick Mahomes game. Lamar Jackson was definitely the leading quarterback in that game. He led the Ravens in rushing and passing yards. He's Lamar Jackson. He's that dude. And Patrick Mahomes, for whatever reason, wasn't on Thursday. He got the job done. The Chiefs did win, so I can't hate on him too much. But I hope to see him playing like true form, partially because he's my fantasy quarterback. And he was projected to get me 21 points, and instead he only got me 14, which you just hate to see on your season opener too. But it is what it is. Hopefully my homeboy is going to get me all those fantasy points next week. Fingers crossed. Now, there was a situation that got going today that was really sad to see, and it was Tyreek Hill was detained by police on his way to the game against, they're playing the Jaguars today. He was driving to the stadium, allegedly, per ESPN's Jeff Darlington. He was pulled over for speeding, allegedly got into a verbal altercation with police. Because of this altercation, police decided to get Tyreek out of the car, and they handcuffed him for about 5 minutes before being released from custody. There was a video going viral on Twitter. They had him on the ground at one point. At one point, it looked like he fell over, got pushed over. You can't really tell from the angle, but it's not a good look for the police department in that city. And we don't have enough facts as far as what Tyreek said to prompt that. So, that remains to be seen. You can't really expound on that, but it's not a good look for the police department. A lot of people stopped and were videoing, and ultimately what they did was legal. This is one of the benefits of being in law school, is when stuff like this happens, I can now recall cases and precedents and stuff that kind of color the thinking. So if you did get pulled over for speeding, even if it was just a minor speeding ticket that, at worst, he's going to get a ticket with a fine. He's not facing jail time. It wasn't a super speeder. Regardless of that, per the case of Atwater v. Lago Vista decided in 2001 by the U.S. Supreme Court, authorities can absolutely arrest you for it, even if you're just going to get fined. In that case, a woman was arrested for driving without a seatbelt, and the Supreme Court held that a warrantless arrest for minor infractions doesn't violate the Fourth Amendment. So, legally, the police had the power to do that. But, I mean, I can't think of anything that he could have said that would have justified them making him get handcuffed and lay it on the ground and do all that stuff. So, I don't know. It's just a bad situation. Hopefully more details come out about it. But Tyreek did play today against the Jaguars. Let me quickly look up what the score was to that. The Dolphins beat the Jaguars 20-17. Let's see how many fantasy points Tyreek got. Let me see if that impacted his performance at all, which, I mean, understandably so. But he got 22 fantasy points, which is more than he was projected. So good to know that he was able to put that behind him. And I can't imagine this situation is going to be too ongoing. Whatever ticket he gets, I'm sure he can pay it. But no point in dwelling on it. But it's just that situation caught me off guard when I got the ESPN notification today. Watching the video is just rough to see. And I look forward to finding out what the details of it are. But hopefully Tyreek can put that behind him and go on and have a good rest of the season and not be too shaken up by that. Because, I mean, I can't imagine what that would be like to just be a regular afternoon driving to go play football and then just be handcuffed and thrown on the sidewalk like that. That would be an awful, awful situation. Now, somebody who is in a great situation right now is Dak Prescott. Dak just signed a 4-year, $240 million contract with the Cowboys, which, as a 31-year-old, will see him under contract with them until he's 35. So the contract is $240 million, but $231 is guaranteed. I guess the other $9 million are in incentives, like if he makes the playoffs or makes the Pro Bowl and things like that. And I don't blame the Cowboys for making this extension. I think that, one, they probably should have done it a while ago. That way they could have moved on from Dak earlier if he doesn't lead them into some deep playoff runs like they're hoping. With an extension like that, he is a franchise quarterback. But his postseason record is 2-5, and the last 2 years the Cowboys have been greatly upset in the postseason. They're greatly underperformed expectations. So Dak has 4 more years to get it done. I mean, I think this would be his last contract as a Cowboy unless they make a really deep playoff run that last year or they win a Super Bowl at some point, because otherwise, once he turns 35, his best years are behind him, and he doesn't have a ring to lean back on like Aaron Rodgers that ingratiates him into the fan base. So for Dak's sake, I hope the Cowboys can put something together and he can make a good go of it these next 4 years, but I don't see much of that materializing. I don't think the Cowboys have too great of playoff Super Bowl hopes, and I think Dak just signed his last extension with the Cowboys, but he's going to be $231 richer at least by the end of it, so more power to him. That's really all the football news going on at the moment. In WWE, SmackDown is going back to USA Network on Friday. It's leaving Fox, where it's been since 2019. And to celebrate, SmackDown is having a huge blowout of a show this upcoming Friday, which is going to be headlined by Solo Sikoa versus Cody Rhodes in a steel cage. Supposedly, the steel cage is to stop the bloodline from interfering in the match. However, steel cages in WWE, as far as I'm aware, have never stopped anybody from interfering in a match. So I think there's going to be a lot of shenanigans that go on here. I think Roman Reigns is going to return and have some part to play in the ending of the show, if not the ending of the match. So the last we saw Roman Reigns was about 3 weeks ago. He got triple power bombed through the Spanish announce table and by the bloodline. And he's been out ever since. I think they're going to want this big first show back on USA Network to mean something and to get people buzzing after the show. So I think Roman Reigns coming back would be a great way to do that. And I also wouldn't be surprised if Kevin Owens turns heel. Now, I'm not sure how they would work it if both Roman Reigns returns and Kevin Owens turns heel, because ultimately, if Roman Reigns returns, then that's going to be the major story coming out of the show. However, Cody Rhodes is going to be wrestling Kevin Owens at Bad Blood in October, most likely in a Hell in a Cell match. So I don't see babyface versus babyface Hell in a Cell match. Like, whenever there's a match inside Hell in a Cell, usually it is a blood feud that's going to get settled and two people just beating the crap out of each other because it's more than just wanting the title. They hate each other's guts. Like, that's the story you tell in the Hell in a Cell match. And if Cody Rhodes and Kevin Owens are just two best buds that respect each other and are going to be fighting for the world title, but at the end of the day, like, it's all sportsmanship, it just doesn't sell as well. So I think what we're going to see is Kevin Owens turn heel on Cody Rhodes and bring back that killer instinct Kevin Owens that we saw years ago in NXT when he turned on Sami Zayn, and the main roster when he beat up John Cena, and when he was just a vicious Street Fighter type character. But I don't know if they're going to turn him heel this Friday or not. Because if Roman comes back, it'll probably be some way to cost Solo Sikoa the championship again, which I hope that's not what they do. Because if Cody Rhodes keeps having to have Roman Reigns help to beat Solo Sikoa, it just is not a good look for him. It makes him look weak. So that's one way Roman can come back. If Solo's about to, walk out of the cage, Roman comes and slams a cage door in his face or something like that. Or maybe the bloodline interferes and Roman comes out and chases him off, and he doesn't touch Solo. That way Cody can still win on his own, and Roman is just the equalizer. But given how Solo helped powerbomb Roman through a table, if Roman's coming back on Friday, I got a strong feeling he's putting his hands on Solo Sikoa. But whatever the case may be, Roman Reigns would definitely have to come out first and deal with the bloodline. And if you're going to turn Kevin Owens heel, the way to do it is to have Cody Rhodes. He just won his championship match. He kept his title. Him and Kevin Owens maybe comes out to help ward off the bloodline too. And at the end of it, Kevin Owens beats up Cody Rhodes, turns heel. Just Cody Rhodes has a bad knee, at least in storyline, maybe in real life too. Just have him beat down on Cody's knee, and in the show with him just staring angrily into the camera and Cody's like screaming in pain on the floor. But that's how you end it with the Kevin Owens heel turn. But I don't see Roman Reigns coming back and him not ending the show. So I wouldn't be surprised if both happen, and we'll see how they make it work. But I also could see one or the other happening. There's going to be either Roman Reigns coming back or Kevin Owens turning heel. We might get both, but put your money on one of those two happening. Now, WWE Bad Blood is going to be in Atlanta. Unfortunately, I won't be able to go, but one match that we can also almost for certain count on getting is CM Punk versus Drew McIntyre inside Hell in a Cell. I think they really need to bring an energy about them in that match that they've been lacking so far in their other matches. I mean, they've had a couple of weapon spots, but for the most part, there's been a lot more wrestling than I would have expected and a lot less fighting. I want to see them treat it like a street fight. Just go in, no rest holds, no arm drags, no submissions. Just start slinging fists and whacking each other with steel chairs and kendo sticks and all that good stuff. But I'm excited to see where that feud ends up going as well. And ultimately, that is all I've got to talk about this week. So thank y'all for tuning in. We appreciate every view that we get. We're going to be posting a lot more on TikTok lately, so be on the lookout for that. I'm going to try to make some Instagram reels as well. And with that, I will see y'all next week.